Han Solo was a human male born on Corellia 29 years before the Battle of Yavin. Despite being a descendant of the noble house of Solo, Han was orphaned at an early age and raised by the pirate Shrike, a cruel taskmaster who regularly abused the boy and taught him the important lessons of self-reliance. As a young adult, Han tried to leave his life of crime and signed up for the Imperial Academy. Despite being top of his classes and making the rank of commander, he was dishonorably discharged when he disobeyed a direct order and saved a Wookiee from an Imperial commander. Han and his new partner, Chewbacca, became the most renowned smugglers of the era. While looking to settle a debt with the Hutts, he agreed to take Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker on a routine transportation to Alderaan. Here he was roped into a rescue mission on the Death Star and ultimately abandoned his life of greed to become a general in the Galactic Civil War. He fell in love with Princess Leia Organa, married her, and had a long life in the New Republic. Henry Walton Jones Jr. was born in New Jersey on July 1, 1899. Henry took a keen interest in hunting ancient treasures and wanted to spend his life unearthing relics. Serving in both the Mexican Revolution and the First World War, he started going by Indianna and earned a degree in linguistics and archaeology, becoming a teacher in the latter subject. Throughout his life, Jones continued fighting the Germans and discovered numerous treasures, including the Golden Fleece, the Covenant of Buddha, Moses' Staff, and the Holy Grail. He was married twice and finally settled down in New York City with his family, living to see his 100th birthday. To keep things even, I will be examining both characters in their physical prime. For Han, this is around the Return of the Jedi. For Jones, this is around the time of the Last Crusade, before the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Han is 33 years old as of the destruction of the Empire. His training under Shrike and his life on the run hardened his strength and reflexes to the point that he could contend with much stronger species. Once as a teenager, Han was forced into a free-for-all with 3 known murderers Boba Fett himself would describe as big bruisers. He was described as jumping 2 meters into the air and throwing a kick hard enough to shatter one's nose and snapping a man's head back instantly. He was also fast enough on the draw that most in the galaxy were terrified of even the possibility of facing him in a gunfight, and tough enough to withstand brutal torture from Darth Vader. Vader has spent over 20 years working on how to best deliver pain, and he knows enough about anatomy to know how to keep a person in pain as long as possible without dying. Even trained Jedi have broken from the amount of pressure the Dark Lord puts on during interrogation. This is by no means a small feat. At the time of the Last Crusade, Jones is 38 years old. His life on the run and in the military gave him ample time to hone his body to its limits and beyond. He's been shown operating machinery that required at least 2 men to operate, wrestled down alligators with his bare hands, and regularly smashes through stone walls with ease. He's been able to outrun a tiger, bring down heavy statues and pillars with his bare hands, and at one point took a crate full of grenades to the face. Granted, this did knock him unconscious, but he should be covered in burns and missing several pieces by now. Jones's greatest feature on the battlefield is in his endurance, and I would liken him to an Obi-Wan Kenobi type in this regard. No matter how many times he's punched, beaten, broken, or burned, he's always able to get back up and hit his opponents harder. This is tough to call. Age isn't going to be much of a factor here. Both men are in the prime of their life and only 5 years apart from one another. Jones and Indy are capable of withstanding nightmarish scenarios and winning. Another thing I didn't want to mention for either because it seems ridiculous, but since we're here, I'll just briefly go over them back to back. Han survived a ship crashing from orbit with no long-term damage despite being violently thrown around the cabin and having no protection from the impact. And Jones walked away from an atomic bomb at ground zero without even a scratch and only the shielding of a common refrigerator protecting him. These two feats do prove that they are near superhuman with durability and far more capability than most people make them out to be, no matter how childish and corny they may seem to the common viewer. In the end, I am going to side with Jones. He's faster in a foot race, has a bit more muscle on his body, and has walked away from tougher scenarios than his competition. Slight edge to Indy. Han carried a DL-44 heavy blaster pistol. The gun had a vibrational system in the handle to let the user know when it was down to 5 shots or less, but it is unknown how many rounds it actually carried. This model was specifically designed for mid-range firing, and found a fine balance between blunt force and marksman accuracy. Solo also continued modifying it himself to keep up with more advanced weapons through the ages. Jones carried numerous firearms throughout his life, never landing on a specific model. Last Crusade era Indy carries a Webley Army model revolver, 4.55 caliber bullets. The chamber only had room for 6 bullets, but Jones usually carried enough ammunition on his person to stay in a fight long term. He himself called the gun too heavy to stay with him, but it served its purpose in a fight. The one thing Jones did carry with him consistently was his classic bullwhip. This served as his melee weapon of choice and gave him additional sets of options, with both heavy hitting power and impressive speed. If we're just comparing firearms, Indy is at a severe disadvantage. A 20th century handgun with old school bullets versus a spacefaring blaster firing ray of energy. You do the math here. But having the bullwhip also gives Jones an advantage at close quarters and a lot more options for what he can do to his opponent. Han's better at long range, Indy's better at short range. It ultimately balances out. No edge given for armament and tools. As a child, Han learned how to take a punch from his life on the streets. During this time, he also learned to play dirty, biting, clawing, anything to undermine his opponents. This was honed by his training at the Imperial Academy, as he learned to implement the technique of a military officer. Much of his ability is inferred by his battles with Shrike, one of the more dangerous bounty hunters in the galaxy and the one who taught him most of what he knows. In several of their later fights, Han was able to disarm and disable the former mercenary with just a few hits to the ribs and the face. Jones' story is not far off from Solo. He spent much of his younger years scrapping with anyone who challenged him, and was usually able to take down his enemies with ease. His time in the American US military, and as a rogue agent fighting the Third Reich, amplified his natural talent. He integrated his bullwhip to disarm opponents, but was mostly geared as a boxer, standing his ground and pounding his enemies into submission. If this didn't work, and he couldn't knock out his opponents or take care of their weapons, he relied on the environment, allowing one man to be sliced into pieces by a plane propeller, or another having had the floor collapsed under him. As Ra's al Ghul would so painfully learn, if you don't mind your surroundings, the results are catastrophic. This is again difficult to call. I would argue that Han's time on the streets and in the academy gave him more knowledge of how to disable an opponent, but Indy's lifelong career on the road gave him a bit more practical experience at using that knowledge. I can see the argument going either way, and can't make a decision in pure skill or ability. I declare Han Solo and Indiana Jones as equals as martial artists and hand-to-hand combatants. Set up this fight. Let's say that somehow Han has come to Earth to smuggle some rare artifacts off-world, and has been caught in the act by a resident archaeologist. If it opens as a long-range gunfight, of course Han has the edge and pushes Jones back, if not killing him outright. Assuming though that Indy is able to weather the storm and close the distance, He will likely disarm Han of his blaster and continue hitting him with his bullwhip. Solo, knowing that this is a bad situation, lunges at Indy and strikes at his wrists, getting rid of the whip and throwing a series of kicks and punches. In most other situations, this would be where Han ends the battle, physically overpowering his opponents. But against Jones, a comparable fighter and a superior physical threat, he can only do so much. Indy wrestles him down, gets the upper hand, probably with some bleeding and broken teeth, but he finally knocks Han unconscious with a right hook. In a 6 out of 10 victory, I declare Indiana Jones the winner.